total novices, don't truly understand what they are up against, and are actually more confident than real masters of something in whatever it is that they're doing.
I'm the guy right now.
Not even experts are this confident.
God bless.
And that's probably because they do understand what they're up against. And consider this one big analogy for today's video. Athletes that are so supremely confident, even arrogant, but they literally have no good reason to be.
Andy has a record of 86-0 with all 86 by knockout.
Way in over their heads. And that's what today's video is about. So let's jump into it. I'm Jason from MMA On Point, and these are the worst UFC fighters ever. A quick disclaimer, while there are definitely some not so great fighters on the first UFC event, I'm gonna generally give them a pass. Art Jemerson, rest his soul, was incredibly underprepared, showing up with just a single boxing glove on, couldn't grapple at all, but back then nobody knew what jiu-jitsu was. That dude could fight for real in boxing as well, so I don't think it's fair to say that. I'm sure had he known of this mysterious grappling art that, again, nobody knew about yet, he probably would have fared much more respectably. But from then on, the cat's out of the bag. If you watched UFC 1 and thought it was easy, then I'm not going to give you the benefit of the doubt anymore. Number 10, Fred Ettish, UFC 2. This fight is a perfect example of what happens when you put a hardened and experienced fighter in the early days up against a traditional martial artist with only theoretical experience, and then toss in a lack of modern rules to go along with it. Basically, Johnny Rhodes had a very real-world boxing and kickboxing background. He'd been hit before in a real combat situation by trained professionals between both of those sports, and well, Fred Ettish, he represented a lot of traditional martial artists back then who just never really had to deal with any actual combat. And essentially, the first punch he got hit with nearly blinded him.
The first good right hand that he hit me with, he hit me over my left eye. And years later, the eye doctor, he says, well, you see this spot, it might be macular degeneration. And on a whim, I said, could it have been caused from trauma? One of the few souvenirs I have of UFC 2 is a scar that you can only see in a picture of my eye deep down inside.
Wow. So if that wasn't bad enough, he took some then actually legal grounded knees to the head, and before you knew it, Johnny Rhodes was essentially mercy choking him out to end the fight as he was left in his own bloody mess on the floor. This could have been way worse. So Fred Ettish, to put it mildly, was heavily trolled online for years and years for his performance in this fight, and the guy actually has a really inspiring story. He overcame the loss of his son, as beautifully captured by Bobby Rozek in this feature interview. Dude even came back a bunch of years later and actually got a win in his old age. But none of that changes the fact that Ettish had zero business being in the cage that night. He was up against some real killers that evening, even if he did somehow get past Johnny Rhodes, and by his own admission, he wouldn't have been ready for anybody else that night either. Number 9, Joe Sun, UFC 4. When people ask you your favorite fight in MMA, this is probably the best troll answer you can give, because it is simply so bad it's good, and the story behind it makes it incredibly satisfying. In essence, Joe Sun is your quintessential caveman.
Hold on. I didn't know he fought. Hold on. This shit, hold on. Why he pulling his drawers off? First of all, nah, this is the best troll
answer you can give, because it is simply so bad it's good, and the story behind it makes it incredibly satisfying. In essence, Joe Sun is your quintessential caveman. His capacity for language is limited. He may or may not have discovered fire yet, and had only recently stumbled upon the concept of lying. So much so that he decided to just call his martial art, well, his own name. Joe Sun Do, as if martial artists just walk around reciting their martial arts name like a Pokemon.
Shama.
On top of that, him being a close friend and charlatan Christian minister to Chemo Leopoldo, he of course also wanted to steal his gimmick, that is carrying a gigantic cross to the cage. I've talked about this in some past videos, but he clearly wasn't strong enough to do this and gassed out his arms and legs as he embarrassingly nearly crumpled down to the floor. And what happened to him was just basically getting taken down by Keith Hackney with ease, and his balls got smashed to smithereens. You might be wondering why I'm talking so much shit about this guy. Well, a quick Google search will fill in the gaps of his truly awful criminal past that YouTube definitely wouldn't be happy about me sharing. So yeah, I'm pretty happy about seeing this guy castrated.
Oh, he a weirdo. Okay. Yeah, he a weirdo. He should have got his head, bro.
Live on TV. But the fact is, this guy knew absolutely nothing about martial arts, and if this list wasn't in chronological order, Joe Sun might actually be the worst UFC fighter ever. The man was simply as terrible and unprepared as you can possibly get. Number 8, Andy Anderson.
Andy has a record of 86-0 with all 86 by knockout.
I mean, dude, what do you even need to say here? That's a conveniently rounded out number, isn't it? This guy was just bald-faced lying to himself and everybody watching. Literally sounds like a kid I met once who was bragging he could survive by himself in the wild. It's like, okay, bro, I totally believe you. This guy's story is fascinating, though. For one, he was allegedly not a martial artist at all. In fact, he owned a restaurant in Texas called the, quote, Totally Nude Steakhouse.
Is that exactly what it sounds like?
Hey, he might be up to something, though. What are you talking? He might have been up to something. What we talking about, though? Is this not a good idea?
Texas called the, quote, Totally Nude Steakhouse.
$5 steaks?
Is that exactly what it sounds like?
Which is exactly what it sounds like. And before he ever stepped into the cage, he actually used to supply the UFC with ring girls from his restaurant. And for some reason, he just really wanted to leverage that relationship with Bob Meyerowitz and the old UFC ownership to give him a shot in the UFC, to which they did. So not only did he claim that he was 86-0 all by knockout, but he also claimed to be a 5th degree Taekwondo black belt. Sometimes you just gotta love the old UFC. It was just so wild.
Hey, do y'all remember some of these dudes in these fights, bro? Let me know in the comments, bro, because this is crazy.
That is wild, isn't it? It's just wild.
Of course, he was almost certainly full of shit about his black belt and immediately got smashed by John Hess, who was about a foot taller. If he landed a single punch, I honestly didn't see it. This was his only MMA fight because of course it was, and he ended up going to prison for his involvement in a meth drug ring and money laundering. He maintains his innocence to this day. The law disagrees. Number 7, Ryan Parker, UFC 7. When was the last time you heard about pressure point techniques in MMA? You might think they are banned in the sport, but in reality, unless you do it with small joint manipulation, you can pretty much have at it. The obvious problem is, well, no matter how real they may be, they just don't really play out well in an actual fight. And as the legend goes, that's what Ryan Parker had bragged about to none other than total dirtbag Gerard Gordeau backstage. His opponent was a very much legit guy in Remcar Pardo. He never had any massive wins in MMA, but he was a very real black belt in judo, taekwondo, Japanese jiu-jitsu, and even became a BJJ black belt later on. And he notably made it all the way to Royce Gracie in his first tournament after winning the first 2 rounds. Talking to the Lights Out MMA podcast, this was Remco Pardo's reaction to the crazy things he was claiming.
He was an Okinawa karate kumite fighter, 3rd degree kumite, master of pressure point strikes, and then he claimed breathing techniques made it impossible to choke him out.
Dude was literally claiming he was a Frank Dukes Bloodsport Kumite champion. Of course, when he went in there, he got taken down immediately and ironically choked out in just about 3 minutes. Allegedly backstage, Gerard Gordeau approached him and said, "How did those pressure point techniques work out for you?" Number 6, Thomas Ramirez, UFC 8. Okay, earlier I was saying that maybe Joe Son was the worst martial artist to step in the cage. Well, this one might just take that dishonor away from him. And if you thought that 86-0 from Andy Anderson was a crazy claim to make a few minutes ago, this takes it even further. Ramirez claimed he was 200-0. Again, a remarkably and conveniently even number. He was 41 years old, 410 pounds. Yeah, this already reeks bullshit, doesn't it? And then his martial art was Pakwa-chan. Supposedly Jet Li trained in this martial art.
In our first demonstration of the swimming dragon form, which imitate the movements of the mythical dragon.
I mean, yeah, sounds legit. And well, he ended up facing off with none other than legend Don Fry.
Oh,
guess what
the
happened?
man's man.
Yeah, this dude got KO'd in only about 8 seconds. And the truth behind it was even crazier than what happened.
Thomas Ramirez. And this guy was a taxi cab driver. He had no business being in there.
He wasn't even a fighter. Number 5, Jason Thacker.
Bro, they were just getting anybody to come in.
Tough one. All right, and from here on out, we are pretty much in what you would consider the modern era with these fights. It's the Zuffa, tough boom, it's everything really taking off. And by 2005, we are already past the confusion of the early days. People are now cross-training in most, if not all of the most effective martial arts. You pretty much know what works, and they usually avoided that crazy style booking. Sad to say with this next example, you can't really lend him that kind of credibility. For one, he was essentially picked up by reality TV execs for the entertainment factor. What happens when you throw a guy on the show who was a bit odd and perhaps underskilled, but could make for some memorable TV moments?
With Thacker was like, that was their way of showing how difficult it was. A guy who had some experience.
Yes, it said one guy up to fail. Yeah.
They wanted to show somebody quitting.
And yeah, what Bonner's saying in here was right. Almost immediately, the first episode, he became a bullying target on the show.
Is he coming? I spritz. Oh, there he goes. Let's rub it in. There's a difference. It's a little, hey.
I'm not gonna lie to y'all, bro. I might have went to jail. Yeah, I probably went to jail. I'd have went to jail. What, he peed on a nigga bit? I'd have went to jail.
Quit being such a retard.
There is a beyond phenomenal article from Chuck Mindenhall on this, which might be my favorite historical profile on a fighter ever, that basically shows how he was essentially training out of an abandoned truck stop with no formal instruction. And so when the dude finally got his shot at retribution against Chris Lieben, well, he pretty much immediately got TKO'd in about a minute and a half. Number 4, Shawn Ganon, UFC 55. This guy was essentially a man with just police training that basically led him to beating Kimbo in one of his most infamous underground videos. And sure enough, Ganon actually did have a couple of fights in MMA before he ever fought Kimbo. So he was somebody who was training for the sport in some ways, but still very much a raw guy, and notably had some issues dealing with guys on the ground. But, you know, he beat Kimbo, and as far as the UFC was concerned, he was a potential star. So they took him at just 2-1 and matched him up against Brandon Lee Hinkle, who was on an 8-fight win streak on the regional scene. On top of that, he'd fought all over the world against guys like Gonzaga and Maurice Smith. This dude was fighting legit talent at a much higher level. And of course, he was also an NCAA wrestler. I really do think the UFC was much different about these sort of things back then. As much as they wanted to cash in on an internet star's fame, sure, it probably would have been fine if he would have won, but I think they were also eager to show how legitimate MMA was back then. This was just after the tough boom. Many still saw it as barroom brawling back then. So to those in the know, this was a squash match from its announcement. And sure enough, they put it as the co-main event for UFC 55, which is wild, and Shawn Ganon pretty much just got slaughtered out there, taken down and smashed with inside a round. Here's what Hinkle had to say to the Lights Out MMA History podcast.
Listen, he's not in the top 50% of the people I fought. He was a big, tough dude, and that's about it.
Number 3, James Toney, UFC 118.
James Toney.
This is James Toney reporting for this goddamn station, whatever it is. I'm out of here.
I don't know if there's a more freak show circus level fight that UFC has ever put on in the modern era, although we've got some very stiff competition still to come. But James Toney had just turned 42 days prior to this event, and he had never fought in MMA. Let that sink in. He had 0 MMA experience, and he was 42 years old. His opponent? Randy Couture. In fairness, Couture had 5 years on the guy fighting at age 47, but I mean, come on. Randy Couture was a mythical level fighter at this point already. He was still in great fighting shape, and only 2 years prior was the literal UFC heavyweight champion. Does this sound like an evenly matched fight to you?
You know, will it be a freak show? No.
But basically the whole thing unfolded because Toney, who was obviously a legendary boxer, used his connections to chase down Dana White, unfolding in a full-on confrontation following UFC 108 at the beginning of 2010. Basically, he felt Dana was disrespecting a lot of boxers.
Roy Jones,
I didn't call them out.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't. They were talking shit. So I said, you want to come over here and fight MMA? Let's fight MMA.
So I suppose after enough badgering, Dana, despite everything, decided to try and make some money out of the situation. Predictably, the boxer got taken down immediately and pretty much mercy choked out. He definitely had no business starting MMA at the age of 42. Hell. Can you imagine if he won, though?
You know, I got to be honest, we got closer to the night. I was nervous. I wasn't the guy going out and trying to badmouth boxing and take boxing down and hurt the sport of boxing. James Toney picked a fight and he got one.
And number 2, and won?
Can't do that.
I just did. Just did.
Yeah, okay, so this was originally going to be 2 separate entries, and they definitely are 2 separate fighters with 2 separate reasons to be on this list, but that doesn't change the fact that they're really intertwined. You all knew who number 1 was going to be on this list. It's obviously CM Punk, by far the least prepared man to step foot into the cage in the modern era.
Hey, don't get that Nito, nigga. But why he chose to do UFC? I don't understand why he did that.
That's what I think makes it even crazier, because now things are pretty well formalized. You know what an MMA fighter looks like. You gotta know far more than somebody did in the 90s, and therefore you had a lot more wild shit going down back then, because literally everybody was just figuring it out. CM Punk gets none of that leniency. All of whom you would consider the literal greatest in the sport were fighting during that time. Kind of a crazy contrast to think about. And CM Punk's fights illustrated that in a starker way than I think you could ever try to explain. So then who is number 2 that I've combined this entry with? Well, you gotta go with the foil to the foil, Mike Jackson.
I will not call him Mike Jackson, okay? He's Michael Jackson.
Yep, Mike Jackson was literally brought in to be the guy that made Mickey Gall look good, who was then to be there to be some sort of reasonable test for CM Punk at a low level. No disrespect to Gall, he ended up being pretty decent. So Mike Jackson was basically the excuse to make Gall have an easy win and be able to call out CM Punk on a UFC broadcast instead of a regional show this time.
I want to be fed, I'm hungry. Feed me CM Punk, please.
Mike Jackson pretty much got ran through in all of his fights, aside from the Dean Barry one where he was basically losing that fight, but Dean Barry fouled so much that he got DQ'd. Really weird fight. Gall took out Jackson easily in the first round, and so did Pete Rodriguez. The truth is, he just didn't belong in there. So after Punk's disastrous UFC debut, this was literally the only option they had left for him to fight. And frankly, Jackson made it look far too easy, to the point that he pretty much pissed off the entire fan base for playing with his food and not finishing the fight when he effortlessly could have.
I don't know what that guy did for a living before we gave him the shot, but whatever it was, he needs to go back and do that again.
Basically, neither guy had any real business being in there. And yeah, it's about as bad as it can get. You know who does belong in the UFC though?
CM Punk, he know he gonna go back to doing, but other buddy tripping.
Problem. That's right, Luke Taylor. He's helped me out with the edit on this video. And
Hey, look, man, shout out to them boys. But look, man, like, comment, subscribe, bro. Y'all already know what's going on. If y'all like these videos when we do like UFC like different videos instead of doing like breakdowns, leave them in the comments. I can give y'all more of these. But hey, I'm gonna see y'all next one, man. No way.